the Evolution Security Podcast. EvoSec Throwback episode. All right, let's take a quick moment to mention a couple of amazing American companies that we are proud to have as sponsors of our show. The first one is Origin. Origin USA is an American entrepreneurial success story. From offering the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gis, period, to their vast line of Jocko fuel supplements. Everything is the highest quality, American quality. Now check out their new line of RTX clothing that stands for Roll, Train, and Execute. They have shorts, shirts, and hoodies, all to keep you comfortable from the mats all the way to the trail. Now go to originusa.com and you can get 10% off on your first order. Now we'd like to mention Tenacor. They offer the most innovative, purpose-built carry solutions on the market. My perfect carry setup is with my Boresight Solutions Glock 19 in my Velo 4 holster, held comfortably in place with my Zero belt. Nothing is as comfortable and nothing conceals as well as that setup. Now, for those of you that love your weapon-mounted lights, most of Tenacor's models come in WML variants, like the Sagex Lux 2, which has some of the same brilliant design attributes as the Velo 4. Go to Tenacor.com and get your everyday carry gear covered.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show, and I'm so excited to have Dr. William Aprill back. How you doing tonight?
Very well, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, and hey, we're joined by Aaron as normal. How you doing, Aaron?
Hey, doing great. Glad to be here with William again, of course.
Oh, yeah. And we've got Eric is out on assignment, so he will not be with us tonight. But that's all right. We're gonna get after it without him. So, of course, this is our second show with William, and he was on episode 11. So if you want to go back and listen to that, there's some more stuff that we won't cover again tonight, but we won't go quite as in depth on this. But William, just for our listeners, just like a 15-second bio on you, who you are and what you do, and of course get a little plug in there for risk consulting as well.
Sure, of course. Well, I'm William Aprill from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm a mid-career mental health professional who branched out about 10 years ago into the personal protection, self-defense space, and do training and consulting in that area, though I still stay pretty active in my mental health private practice. I run a company called Aprill Risk Consulting, where we talk mostly about violent criminal actor mindset, but try and cover quite a bit of preparation waterfront, as Craig Douglas calls it, the pre-kinetic side of the problem.
Nice. Well, there's something that you do on your post. I see this on Facebook. I'm sure you do it on the other platforms as well, but where it's the It's Not You Tuesday. And I feel like a lot of us are in a position right now where it could be you Tuesday. Because there's some stuff going on right now that, we're being shown on the news, and we're probably not getting the full story. But I really feel like a lot of people should maybe start taking some attention to this because, with the result of what happened, over the past weeks with, of course, we're already in COVID lockdown. We're dealing with, not martial law, but some restrictions on our movement and what some people might call our freedoms. And then, we have this officer and George Floyd situation. And now we've actually got people in the streets breaking windows, looting stores, and basically having a free-for-all in these cities. And, what do you think about that, how that relates to, like, the average citizen that lives near that activity going on,
Well, as I do sort of try and get little daily mindset nuggets out there, especially on Instagram and Facebook. The one of them I put out there was to address the fact that the most common question I get is, how could somebody do that? I cannot tell you how many emails I get every week that have a link from somebody's local newspaper or local news outlet with a horrible detailed crime explanation and the simple question, how could somebody do that? And I was sitting there thinking about how to address all these, and it suddenly dawned on me that what most people are doing is letting their own internal yardstick guide what other people's capacity is. And I answered it with this post. It was called, "They Are Not You." That's how they can do this. They are not you. The internal structures that you have that keep you from doing those things simply aren't present in these people. And it happened to fall on a Tuesday. And that next Tuesday, I thought, well, what the hell? I'll just make it "They Are Not You" Tuesday. And they tend to be examples, like today's example is of some horrific child abuse cases. What we're trying to get across to people is that violent criminal actors, that very narrow subset of the most dangerous violent criminals, are running what can only be called a parallel set of software. And you could argue even a parallel set of hardware. And that using your own internal measures to try and make sense of it is just a losing battle. That we've got to think of it as a completely different problem to be considered from the inside of ourselves. It's a little bit like being an exobiologist, thinking of animals from another planet. How could you relate to them? Well, you certainly couldn't do it by comparing them to the animals that you know, and certainly not comparing them to yourself. And I think the same issues come up in issues of rioting and civil unrest like this, because what you've got is something that I think people can make sense of. It is entirely legitimate to get out and protest something that you think is wrong. It's entirely to get out and protest something that you think is morally reprehensible. That's what some of the people are doing. But then there's some other people. And what they're doing is, in some cases, straight up crime. In some cases, political, activism and direct action. But they can all get tangled up together. And I think people can find themselves in over their heads. If you want to show up and protest and then looting occurs, well, now you're in a crowd that's looting. And you've made a decision you probably didn't quite set out to make.
Yeah, and that's part of what I wanted to address, too, because we kind of get this mob mentality going where I think we have some, for lack of a better term, some real pot stirrers out there on the forefront, the ones that start throwing rocks and taunting the police and then maybe break into the, like you say, the criminal activity portion. And I think some of those people are just kind of along for the ride at that point.
Well, yeah, I use the term slipstreaming because Let's say you've got the mass of people who are really troubled by what happened. And by the way, count me among them. I'm really troubled by the recent in-custody death in Minneapolis. I think it's completely unacceptable. But you've got people out there protesting that. And then in the slipstream of that crowd, you've got people with entirely different agendas. There's actually been some very interesting research to come out of France over their history of very serious conflict, which parallels these kinds of conflicts. There were a series of what are called banlieue uprisings, which were these high-rise ghettos outside of Paris. And there have been some serious racial unrest out there. And then there were, of course, the Maillot Jaune protests about economic conditions. And some very interesting research has been done in France showing that there's a little bit of a viral contagion effect with the folks who are doing what I call the slipstreaming. They are activists who swim into the wake of a legitimate protest crowd, and they are there to foment chaos, to take advantage of that moment to make things worse. Then when the situation is escalated to where it's truly just chaos, as close to anarchy as they can get, those outside agitators leave, having already turned the inflammable liquid into flames. They tend to leave, moving on to the next site. So it's a little bit of a viral contagion effect, where a pathogen in the form of an agenda-driven activist shows up, makes every problem present worse, and then once it's at its maximum potential terribleness, leaves. And this is something I think just about every decent American, especially a decent American who wants to protest legitimately, should have a problem with.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to be too focused on much of it, but here in my town, I live in Olympia, Washington. little town. It is the state capital, but we're nothing compared to Seattle or Portland. We're a blip. It's just some houses and some stores. And the last two nights, I finally called it quits at 11. But I was listening to the police scanner and watching some live feed of the police chasing a group of 100 to 150 guys around downtown with flashbangs and pepper spray. And they're throwing rocks at cops, and this is happening, starting up around 9 to 10 p.m. And then they kind of get a little whipped up around 11. And it's like, if you're honestly protesting something and want to be seen and heard, why are you doing it at 11 p.m. in the middle of the night in Olympia? I just really feel like these guys are
an entirely reasonable question.
Up to no good.
The point of protest is the public gesture. You don't do it in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night is because you intend to get up to some shenanigans under the guise of protest. Here in New Orleans, we've had an unbelievably appropriate bunch of demonstrations. There have been marches, there's been chanting, there's been, vigorous disapproval of social causes. And I think what's happening is fantastic. Even the crowds are respecting sort of social distancing, which is, I find very fascinating. But there hasn't been even an inkling of rioting. There doesn't need to be an inkling of rioting because that's not the point. And actually, there's been some chatter today from police intelligence circles that there's a little disappointment among the kind of self-appointed Antifa class of people that there isn't rioting happening in the city, and agitators are planning to come here and try and start it. And that's that kind of pathogenic effect I'm talking about, where somebody from the outside will step in and pervert a legitimate energy, legitimate expression into something that furthers their agenda of chaos and rage. And that's completely unacceptable. And I hope and expect to see the police crush those people like bugs.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we did not see in Portland or Seattle. And, we have, mainstream media all over the U.S. showing cop cars burning in Seattle while the police are literally backing away because they've been told to stand down. And I was a little disappointed with that. And again, we don't need to start billy clubbing people. I get it, but we can't stand for that type of behavior either, I don't think. And go ahead.
One of the foundations of a civil society is a legitimate monopoly on the use of force by the state, outside of personal defense and self-protection, of course. Well, when you decide, as in Minneapolis, that the better part of valor is to let a crowd burn down a police station, I'm not sure we're going in the right direction. Yeah. Because at that point, how can you say that the use of force is going to be legitimate when letting a crowd breathe, unquote, or letting them vent involves use of lethal force. Not to mention the unbelievable destruction of property and the cost it's going to take to rebuild all those structures. I mean, it's a political strategy, I guess, more than anything else. But what it does is it puts the police in a terrible situation, because the police are now standing there being told not to enforce laws being broken right in front of them. And if it's your shop being burned down and you're standing there watching the police let it happen, that isn't going to make you feel good about the police either. And so now the agitators hate the police, almost as a hobby. And now the victims hate the police because the victims watch the agitators destroy their life's work. Policing's a hard job without being thrown under the bus in that way.
Oh, it's a thankless job, that's for sure. There are many, and there's an interesting thing that I was thinking about today, and they had some thought to be very good information because the ATF and has been actually sharing some stuff with some gun shops that were specifically targeted in Washington and letting people know, like, hey, you may be at risk because some of these places are going around and actually attempting to steal guns, which is a little disturbing. But Coeur d'Alene, some of this shenanigans had gone down in Spokane, and the people in Coeur d'Alene were told that they intended to do the same thing there last night. And what happened in Coeur d'Alene was every redneck and his brother, bless them. I don't say that in a befriending way, not but all came out, and thousands of people took to the streets and stood in front of businesses and were armed and said, "You're not doing this to our town." What I find troubling about that is Saturday we have imagery of police cars burning and people and the police backing away, and then we have this massively armed white party. And the divide that people are being shown and force-fed with that, just, I don't like where I think that could go.
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. It's a little bit disturbing to think that they would have to, but if they do, they do. Defense of the body politic is an individual responsibility. We outsource use of force, obviously, to the police and the military, but there are times, that those powers are vested with us for a reason. Civil unrest of this sort, the purely destructive sort, is something that I think every good citizen has a stake in. And when enough is enough, I think that's a very important duty that we've got to shoulder.
Yeah, no, and I definitely don't bring it up to say that they shouldn't have done it. It's the concern I've got is what people see psychologically, what that's doing, where they're not, because there's a lot of people that are going to see that don't think we should act that way, that we should wait for the police to take care of it, or that, and I guess that's one of the things I don't like is there's always this rhetoric of, well, only the police need to have guns. Well, they're not using them. So when we have cities literally being burnt down, I definitely believe that at some point, I agree that the people that live there are going to have to protect their property.
Well, I also think it's that something that people, let's say, a little more naive about self-protection and use of firearms, et cetera, when they see the gun, they think that means violence, meaning that the presence of the gun will produce violence. A credible deterrent threat of violence is actually a violence prevention measure. You won't see a looter with a Molotov cocktail walk up to a row of guys with rifles and throw a Molotov cocktail at the building.
Right.
You just won't. So it's the credible threat of defensive violence that prevents violence. It's the undefended person, that is truly open to be victimized. And so I think that, I don't blame folks that are naive for being naive. They just don't know. But that's, sort of a knee-jerk reaction out of ignorance, that if I see a gun, that means violence is going to happen. When in fact, people that are around guns know that it's just the opposite often, that the presence of the gun prevents violence.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's the intent. There was some footage where one of the youths in Seattle, they had broken into a police car and smashed it, and there happened to be an unsecured AR in the rear of that vehicle, and he had removed it and was handling it, and one of the armed hired security guards for the media came up and basically put a Glock in his face and took it away from him very easily, by the way, and you should have seen the face.
Yeah, the footage made the rounds very quickly, and there was a lot of question of who the gentleman doing the disarming was. But I can tell you what he was. He was not playing around.
Exactly. No, he executed that very well. Cleared his back, cleared the weapon, and then extracted himself from the situation. That was very well handled, in my opinion.
And frankly, a non-violent intervention. You bet. He certainly muzzled the guy stealing the gun, but there was no sense that there was shooting imminent, because I think, judging his sincerity correctly, he instantly surrendered, which is the point,
Why do you think people have that knee-jerk reaction? Do you think that's due to, just be frank, propaganda, or just being the fact that most people now aren't around gun culture, or how would you explain that?
Well, it is getting less and less common. I mean, it's the curse of averages that averages tend to be misleading. And if you look at the number of guns, the number of Americans, well, hell, you'd assume that everyone has a bunch of guns. But it doesn't work that way because some of you, meaning some of you too, are skewing that average quite a bit, I would imagine. And so gun ownership, especially urban gun ownership, is on the decline. And so it's just something people don't know about. It's a little bit like me and hang gliding. The only thing I know about hang gliding is what I see in media. But even that's not a very good analogy because what I see in media isn't negative about hang gliding. But even the expressions you hear in media, a man with a gun, what that means is that a crime is happening to the average person. Oh my goodness, there's a man with a gun. Well, that's terrible. Well, it's not terrible. It's value neutral. It might be terrible. It might be great. We don't know. And so left to that, just the media depictions of things, I think people's only there's no foundation for them to help correct or check against being given some pretty bizarre beliefs that then are uncontested and become concretized into truth. And suddenly people have these very strongly held opinions with absolutely no foundation to them whatsoever, but they hold them terribly strongly. And so, and I understand that people's fear is a legitimate emotion, but it's legitimate for them. That doesn't mean it's legitimate in terms of motivating me or motivating someone else to change their behavior. And so we've got, we're sort of fighting against a battle where the media is against us in forming these opinions, and it's hard to get back to neutral when someone's entirety of their experience with what they know and hear about guns is negative.
Well, as we're talking about this major tide of violence in the country, let's kind of circle it back to, let's just be frank, the individual that started this all, which would be Officer Derek Chauvin. Now, since, of course, William, many of our listeners know that you are a mental health professional and that you are a doctor in psychology, and I'm just curious what your assessment is of an officer. Of course, there are very few of these officers. The media and others like to make everyone think that they're just rampant, but this individual, this type of officer, what is the psychology? How do they get to where they would treat someone like this officer did?
I'm very leery of talking about the insides of someone I've never met and don't know and shouldn't and won't. But I can tell you that what it looks like is atrocious police work. When you put handcuffs on someone, you are responsible for their life, literally. And he didn't exercise an appropriate degree of care for the life that is in his care and in his trust. So more than anything else, I'm offended by it aesthetically, professionally, and morally. That is an incredibly careless and reckless act, and someone died. And if you read the charging documents, they seem to be about that, creating reckless conditions where someone died. And that's a very serious crime and should be a very serious crime. But talking about the things that can make someone that callous, without, of course, speaking to the actual person involved, feelings of alienation from the community. It's easier to hurt someone and easier not to care if they're being hurt if you don't view them as a person with equal value as yourself. That's a two-way street because communities that in which the police aren't liked, the police tend not to like them back as well. And there's no point in punctuating who started it because it's a problem that cuts both ways. So feeling overworked, marginalized, all kinds of things can lead to that kind of contempt where it isn't the fully formed intent to do evil, but the lack of enough care not to. And I think of that as kind of a moral callous. And I understand where it comes from, but frankly, I'd like to think that professional pride and personal self-respect would prevent any fully functioning adult from getting there.
It's definitely difficult to watch that video, and
it should be. It's incredibly distressing. And the the facial expressions say a lot. I mean, we can't say that they're necessarily a mirror to the soul, but he didn't look like he was in distress as he was causing distress, and that's troubling.
Well, one of the keys that stood out to me was that he had his hand in his pocket. If you are in a struggle, your hands are moving. You're stabilizing yourself against the vehicle if he needed to, or the ground, etc. Right? Not with your hand in your pocket if you're concerned about a resisting opponent.
No, I would agree. To me, that was a little bit of a stylistic verbal fuck you, nonverbal fuck you.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with this man to the point that force winds up killing him, that's completely different. But we didn't see anything of the sort. In fact, he's got his hands in his pockets, kind of as a cool factor. It looks like, and that I think makes it worse. It's it's not a good look.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's try and cover a few more items here, kind of segueing into, of course, the other major item, which would be us being under lockdown under COVID-19 and, frankly, government actions. I have my views on it, but like you said, let's have a conversation about that. And because I've heard you on another show, you were on American Warrior Society and had a lot of great things to say, especially about the unintended consequences. So I kind of like to hear a little bit more of your assessment on how you
the politicization of the entire thing has been really the distressing thing to watch. First off, in terms of a hierarchy of needs, right? My feeling is that the reason it got political so quickly is because it wasn't the existential threat it was cracked up to be. It wasn't SARS or MERS or one of those illnesses that crops up that has a 50, 60% mortality rate. Now, it looked quite bad in the beginning, but the fact that we were free to play politics with it so quickly is the proof that it wasn't. And of course, it didn't turn out to be anywhere near that lethal. But I also think it caused, the political overlay caused a really quick division and a false division between people who were trying to save lives, unquote, and people who were only concerned about money, unquote. It does fascinate me that people think that the economy, unquote, is something that only hedge fund zillionaires and Wall Street wizards partake in. The economy is people's ability to pay their rent, people's ability to pay their mortgage, people's ability to work, people's ability to earn a living and have a business. And when you start a process, a disease management process that zeroes out the economy, that has real consequences in morbidity and mortality, which means people are going to get sick and they're going to die from the economy, unquote, not necessarily from the disease itself. There is every reason to believe that economic downturn to the point of a recession or even a depression can and will likely cost as many lives as COVID has, mostly through what we call healthcare deferral. If you lose your job and your health insurance goes with it, you won't be following up on your chronic health conditions. Your health will decline. There'll be morbidity and sickness and mortality, fatalities that will follow that. Healthcare, we hear that elective surgeries have been, postponed, and that makes us think of nose jobs. Somebody's rhinoplasty or their eye lift is delayed. Well, who cares? That's just a rich person, and they'll have to wait their turn. Well, heart surgeries are elective, and to delay those costs lives. And so this notion that we're only concerned about money is ridiculous, because economic downturn costs lives. It causes suffering and it costs lives. And to allow the dichotomy to be falsely drawn between caring about people and caring about money is just truly offensive.
Well, and then one of the first things that popped in my mind, as you've heard me talk about on the first show that I'm a musician. Well, I hang out in a guitar playing musician forum, and they were talking about this. I mean, this is when things first started going downhill. And I said, guys, this is going to cause possibly a depression. And do you know what happened in the depression with the suicide rate? And of course, it got shot down really quick, but that is real. I heard you talk about that too, but of course, the suicide rate was the highest ever, of course, during the Great Depression.
There was a report from a physician in California the week before last, I believe. He said his hospital had seen more suicide attempts in the previous week than they had seen in the previous year.
Wow.
I read a report from some physician crunching numbers for unemployment, and their estimate was that if unemployment reaches 25% in the United States, and it's well over 25% here in New Orleans, may I add, but that an unemployment rate of 25% can be directly expected to produce 77,000 deaths by suicide.
Wow.
That's almost as many people have died from COVID.
And then you're adding back to the situation that you talked about before, which is the deferred health care.
Absolutely. If you don't have the money to pay your copay, and if your insurance has lapsed when you lost your job or your business closed, you're going to defer health care that may be necessary not to keep you alive today, but maybe shaving years off your life expectancy as you don't manage chronic conditions. So it's lives versus lives is what I'm trying to get at, instead of the lives versus money that it's being painted as. And that's just offensive, frankly.
Thank you for calling it what it is.
Yes, and the problem is that most of the time, it's the emotional side that can, quote, win the argument, because they can shame those of us that are bringing up the unintended consequences and the not explicit, the implicit issues underneath that we're the heartless ones.
Exactly right. And that's why, that I keep saying, and we've got to harp on it, it's lives versus lives, not lives versus money. The question is, what are the, if lives are going to be at risk, right? I mean, the point of a lockdown was never to stop the spread of the disease. It's to delay the spread of the disease so that it wouldn't overwhelm systems that would cause more mortality to rise. The plan was never lock everyone down until no one can ever catch COVID-19 again. That is not a time that exists. That is not a time that ever will exist. It was to lower the disease profile as it swept through to becoming endemic, meaning, in every corner of the world. Well, that worked. And then it was almost like people couldn't take yes for an answer. That worked. So now you undo the process that you started. Now that the curve has been flattened, then you start doing normal things, returning back to as much normalcy as possible.
One of the main questions that I have is the precedence that has been set for whenever there would be a real pandemic. Now, we don't, I don't want to sound heartless about this, but like you said, it's lives versus lives, but we've still set this precedent for significant suppression of our abilities to live our lives. What's going to happen when there's something where, a virus that has a 10% lethality?
Yeah, like SARS. And so, I think people lost sight of the purpose of lockdown. And I think it's important that we distinguish between a lockdown and quarantine. Quarantine is isolating sick people from a healthy population. Isolating the healthy population from itself and from sick people, that's a lockdown. That's not a quarantine. And so we've got to recognize that it's an extreme measure. And so was it inappropriate at the time it was ordered? No, I don't think so. Things were looking very bad. The curve was looking very steep and unmanageable and really problematic. But where it got a little bit out of hand was the notion that local responses are going to be more informed. There are some things about which we're one nation, and there are some things about which we're 50 states. And every state has a vested interest in its own situation. I read a great line during the peak of the real peak of the bad times in New York City. And a writer asked the question: if half of the COVID deaths in the United States took place in Montana, would New York City lock itself down? And I thought that was a fascinating question, because we had everyone saying everywhere needs to be like New York. Everywhere needs to be completely locked down. Well, is that true in Montana? And so this notion that one perfect response is going to issue down from somebody, whether it's Dr. Fauci or the president or anyone, that one person is going to give a perfect one-size-fits-all response that's going to solve every problem everywhere equally perfectly is ridiculous. In a sense, it's magical thinking. It's the notion that Big Daddy in the sky is going to hand us the solution on tablets, and that's just not how it works.
Now, how much in your experience and in your research, how much do you think crime, and especially violent crime, has increased during this time? But set aside the riots.
Sure. I mean, I think we're talking about pre-riot and post-riot, in the COVID context. But I don't think there's been, what people's fears were, that there would be sort of zombie hordes of marauders, taking over inner cities. And that just hasn't been borne out. But you have seen different kinds of, especially physical violence, get quite a bit worse during lockdown, mostly around interpersonal violence in the domestic sphere.
Oh, yeah.
There's been an extraordinary increase in domestic violence. A lot of people use the ability to move around and the ability to operate in the larger world as a buffering mechanism for home lives that aren't necessarily so great. But when you're locked down with the same people day after day, week after week, month after month, your capacity to manage that can get strained to the maximum. And you don't have to look very far to see some pretty dramatic increases in domestic violence just about everywhere.
So that kind of brings me to trying to go into another one of your topics of expertise, because we have you to tap for issues of security. Of course, this is a show that focuses on personal security. Now, we didn't get too deep into this last time we had you on, but in this instance, I would like to maybe go in pretty deep to this. You're with the ShivWorks Collective, there's, of course, what most people know as the criminal assault paradigm. You, of course, have deep knowledge of the way criminals think. But what I'm curious is kind of a process that criminals would take, from the beginning to the end, and how they choose a person and then go ahead and assault the victim. And then further, what locations would you be most concerned about being assaulted? Yeah, I know that's a long question, but
No, not at all. Not a perfectly good question. The most important thing to realize is that the criminal's process of choosing starts years, decades before any kind of interaction that might involve you. They're building up a knowledge base that forms a template. And it's from what they've learned and what they've seen and what they've experienced. And it yields a rough and ready outline that they're going to apply to every person that catches their attention in the environment. And it's when I've talked to, I've interviewed thousands of violent offenders, and they talk about somebody being a good victim, or if they don't use the word victim, they talk about a good catch, about a good lick, about someone who fits the pattern, a little bit like Cinderella, and that can be completely the process is unpredictable, and so it's hard to figure out in the abstract what they're going to look for, because everybody's got their own sense of what is just right. It's kind of like if you're making chili. Everybody's chili is different, but you're going to season it until it's right. Well, what's right? Right is what's right to you. I might not like it, but you like it, so it's right. Well, a criminal's template is going to fit what he's looking for. But generally, I think the most important thing that seems to stand out to me is folks that aren't engaged with their own environment. I cannot tell you how many times a violent offender has talked about the fact that they could walk right up on somebody who wouldn't even notice they were there until they were in arm's length. So the number one risk factor for me is disengagement with our environment. People walk through space, but occupy their time and mind with something else other than that. It's easy to blame cell phones and all that, but if you're lost in your head, it's just as dangerous as being lost in your phone. Especially given that it tells a violent criminal actor that the field for exploitation is open so wide. So you have to get their attention in some way, perhaps by not interacting with your environment. They can see that you're just locked up in your head. Then there's a process of what you'll sometimes hear referred to as an interview. It's a job interview, if you will. You're being interviewed for the position of victim, and they want to see if you fit. And a lot of times people are worried about blitz attacks. Folks tend to stress a lot about somebody just walking up and attacking them. That's a lot less common than ambiguous interactions, because the ambiguous interaction allows the offender to get information from you that tells them what will work and what won't against you. Things like imposition into someone's space, or accidental contact, or requests for verbal interaction, or boundary violations. Any of these things are to get a response from the victim that can then be judged by the perpetrator to figure out, is their gambit going to work, their chosen gambit? Do they need to do something else? So that interview process is very, very quick, but it's dense with information. They're always seeking the most cues for your status from the fewest amount of prompts. They want the most bang for the buck, if you will.
Yeah, we spoke with Masad Ayub a couple of weeks ago, and he explained when someone of this type has selected a victim and made a physical or violent threat against them, and the gun comes out from the victim. And all of a sudden, the perpetrator realizes he has made a sudden and acute failure in the victim selection process. And I just really enjoyed hearing him say that, because he walked it through and then used that statement. It's like it's like I want to cheer for the guy, but it's like one thing that I need to remember is not getting engaged in that to begin with is usually the best solution. If
Right.
you are somewhere you cannot remove yourself from and have to engage someone, that's the worst case scenario. We put the seatbelt on, we drove safely, and we still got in a car crash, right?
Right.
But right now, with what's going on everywhere, and we talk about this, I'm concerned a little about some people who will still go to places that they have heard there may be people gathering, or there may be some shit going down. And it's like, why would you do that?
I find it fascinating when people say, well, hold on a second. First, I understand why people want to be around something significant.
Sure.
Right? I mean, why did people go to Times Square when World War II ended? Because something big was happening, and we're a social animal, and we want to share it with others like us. So, and especially people, I think, that are interested in self-protection, we kind of want to know what's going on, and for real. But we got to recognize that while that has some value, it doesn't mean it has, it shouldn't have deciding value. If you're just going because, I don't find that a very compelling reason once you start adding up what's in the actual risk profile. And I'll hear some people say, well, I'd go, but I'm going to bring a gun with me. Well, if you wouldn't go without a gun, maybe you shouldn't go with a gun. If the risk profile is high enough that you say, I'm going to bring a gun, or I'm going to bring two guns, or a bigger gun, or a better gun, maybe that's a good reason not to go. Maybe you can watch a live feed or watch the news and find out that way. One of the rules, it's more of a psychotherapeutic rule, but it can also apply here. If you're unable to identify a good reason that you're doing something, you're likely doing it for a bad reason that you don't acknowledge.
Interesting.
Yep, I like that.
And just to see what's going on, I don't find a particularly good reason to put your life at risk. I'm sure your loved ones would share that with me.
Yeah, we've got a situation here. This was last year where a gentleman had gone to confront someone who he believed was not a veteran, who was pretending to be a veteran to get handouts at the corner. And he went and kind of was aggressive with the guy. And a third party came up and began attacking him. And in the guise of self-defense, which maybe not, he drew a gun, dispatched it, and the guy died. Now, because he walked into that willfully with a gun, he was the instigator. And I believe he wound up with manslaughter, but he is currently in prison. And even though he was defending himself from a third party attacking him, he chose to go engage that other individual and start shit, for lack of a better term.
No, and this is one of the first rules I remember. My very first training years and years and years ago, private sector training outside of law enforcement training, was with Masad Ayub with the old LFI 1 class, and he said something that day the first day that I will never forget. He said, "If you're carrying a gun, any fight you're in is a gunfight.
Yep.
And if you don't want to be in a gunfight over something, you have a higher standard of care. It's your job to avoid fights that shouldn't be gunfights turning into fights if you're the one turning it into a gunfight." So people oftentimes use concealed carry and a sense of power that they derive from that sort of puffs them up. Well, I'm now more powerful than I was. I'm more able to intervene. Frankly, I'm more cautious and withholding a little bit with a gun than I am without, because there's a great number of things that can go wrong by the introduction of a gun that that can't be taken back. So I think we got to think of it as a higher standard of care that comes with the gun, not a lower standard of care, and a higher standard to intervene, not a lower standard to intervene.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that. I would much rather be around the corner from the situation that has unfolded than charging into it when I'm carrying. If there's imminent loss of life that I could intervene in, that would be a thought process to take place at the time. But if there's an opportunity to remove myself from the situation, I'm definitely going to take that choice.
In every single human interaction, there's an element of risk, and it's uncontrollable. And to you break it, you bought it is a kind of a life rule, and not to have meant for the fight, for an event, let's say, to turn into a fight that turns into a gunfight, not to have meant that to happen isn't really going to matter if it does happen. And so, you don't get to run around with matches and gasoline and then duck the blame for the fire that starts. Well, if you run around with a careless attitude and a firearm and a shooting breaks out, you don't get to duck responsibility for that either.
Yeah. Side note, one of the live feeds I was watching on, I guess that would be Monday night, was a gentleman rides through on a 10-speed bicycle with a gas can strapped to the back of it. And I'm like, what are you doing downtown in a quote unquote protest with a gallon of gas? You are not looking to you're clearly looking to cause trouble. But
and there was a clip that made the rounds on Instagram. I don't know if you y'all managed to take a peek at it. It was a woman being filmed. She had witnessed a car full of kids driving through the neighborhood, handing out bricks for people to throw.
Wow.
And she took the brick back from someone and confronted the people in the car with saying, "What the hell are you doing? You're coming down here to encourage people to vandalize?" And I'm proud of that woman. I think she deserves a medal.
Yeah.
For standing up, because then you've got people practicing recreational outrage. Here, I will help you trash your neighborhood. That's unbelievably distressing. And I think people that are engaging in this for fun should be buried under the jail.
Yeah.
Now, William, this was, of course, we're back on the topic of these riots and violent protests. Do you think, I guess I digress, it seems like this is significantly worse than these things have occurred in the recent past. Do you think that the people being locked down under the COVID situation added to
Oh, of
inflame this
course.
situation?
Of course. You've got an extraordinary amount of pent up energy and pent up frustration and financial stress and unemployment and chaos and sickness. And, I think this is just the worst possible time something like this could have happened because there's so much ambient energy. And you can see it in crowds too. There's an expression that's normally used in a positive way. They say a rising tide lifts all boats. But the problem is a rising tide of emotionality lifts all boats toward destructive emotionality. And when folks are already in motion, borne up by significant bad feelings about other things going on, it's easier to lose control. It's easier to be unable to govern your emotions. And everybody's trigger gets a little lighter because our ability our ability to have resilience, to bounce back, is taxed over time by this. This has been an odd event, the COVID lockdown. It's a crisis atmosphere, but it's also an acute and a chronic event, which is a little bit weird. Humans are designed for episodic acuteness. Something bad happens, we ramp up, take care of it, ramp down. Ramp up, take care of it, ramp down. Chronic stress, and especially chronic acute stress, is not something we're really wired for. We don't handle it well, and it tends to use up our ability to manage our emotions and keep control of our thinking and stay functional. And so there's just less tread on the tires when we really need the brakes to work.
Well, and as you're stating that, I'm thinking about it's almost like we're still in one kind of government control issue with COVID and all the overreactions, to be frank. But now we're going into another issue with again, the president threatening to send out the army, right? Which I'm not sure I understand that and agree with that. But I mean, it's like we're going from one set of controls to another set of controls.
Yeah, and much more, much more overt and harder to ignore.
And this really starts sounding like the dreaded, thrown around martial law, right? I mean, that's a trite term, but at the same time, it still starts smelling a lot like what we've been talking about over the last several months.
Yeah, especially when it's done badly. Another clip that was thrown around was of some police officers using less lethal munitions on people standing on their own porch. And I found that very distressing because that kind of wanton application of force for no reason, that's the kind of thing that causes contempt for the cops, and they don't need that from regular people. Contempt of cop is not a crime on paper, but it's a crime in the real world. I think that to say I'm standing on my own porch in my own house to be ordered to go inside on pain of being shot with less lethal munition, I got a problem with that. And I think most people do. And I think the police, if they want our respect and compliance and assistance, they need to do their job too, which is to not engage in abuse like that.
And that's coming from you, a former sheriff's deputy, correct?
I worked as sheriff's deputy and also for the U.S. Marshal Service. And frankly, nobody hates bad police work more than good police.
Yeah. Because
it makes good police work harder. Just like a bad doctor hates bad doctors and a bad lawyer hates bad lawyers. A bad musician hates bad musicians, right?
Well, and along those lines, right? One of the most vocal and frankly, I mean, again, quite vocal is Chuck Haggard. I mean, when there's some bad policing, he's out there and he's pitching a fit.
Absolutely.
Same thing with Greg Ellifritz.
Sure. That if you've taken an interest in being good at something, watching somebody do something important badly is professionally aesthetically and morally offensive. And we're not just talking about, somebody who's making a cake that isn't as good as it's supposed to be. This is really important, and it can have lasting effects. Better police work, and we're not talking right now. Better police work, and we're not having this conversation. Think about it. All of these riots would not have happened for want of better police work. That's the kind of power that the individual line officer has, and I wish they'd realize it. The good ones do. The bad ones don't.
Yeah, I definitely would say that the most of my friends are more conservative and probably a little right-leaning, but I've got a couple of friends that are pretty biased against law enforcement because they've seen the bad side of departments. They've seen shoddy police work. They've seen taxation of merely revenue generation from small departments, and I get it. I understand why they feel that way. And it's unfortunate because it does paint the picture on a whole for them. I choose to look a little broader than that and have hope, but it is discouraging to see people that I know and have known for quite some time look negatively on law enforcement as a whole.
Well, and it's also used as a really lazy and sloppy rhetorical device. You'll have somebody say, well, I guess you think it's okay that the cops killed that guy. Actually, no, I don't. As a matter of fact, I think it's a travesty. That's the equivalent of me saying, oh, you're on the side of the criminal. That's an equally lazy and stupid thing to say.
Yeah.
I can have all kinds of problems with it and still disapprove of what's coming out of it in terms of rioting. They're not equivalent. A riot isn't the cost of having had this other bad thing happen. What fascinates me is that if we're going to take the moral position that what happened to the victim in that case was wrong, tell me how right it is to burn down a business of someone else, to hurt someone else who doesn't deserve it, to make up for a wrong that was done to the first person?
Yeah, we have several deaths at this point that are direct result of this criminal activity, obviously. And
several targeted assassinations of law enforcement personnel.
Yes.
2 federal police service officers were shot in Oakland, California, one of whom died. Another police officer was shot in the back of the head the other day and killed. When you start talking about targeted assassinations, I think you've lost the thread of protest.
Yes.
It requires everybody to have a little more nuanced situation. I mean, I am all in favor of protest, even vehement protest, but there's a line. And when you cross it, you lose legitimacy. The funny thing is there's a tremendous amount of research to show that the more extreme the practice taken to protest something, it actually costs support, even though the protest may have itself been legitimate at first. And it hardens opposition. It actually forces people into the other camp. So what I say to people is if your idea of how to get people to pay attention to police violence is to burn down a Starbucks, you are literally turning people against you. You are making it harder for them to hear the legitimate point you may have been trying to make. And at that point, it's just a tantrum. A tantrum has no goal. I always say there's a difference between fury, I'm furious about this event and I'm going to vent that fury, and rage. Fury has a target. I want this event never to happen again. I want this set of circumstances never to arise again. I want a goal to come out of this. Rage is just the expression of internal disquiet. It's just, I'm going to splatter as much mess as I can. I have no tolerance for rage, and I don't think there's much place for it in a civilized society. Fury, on the other hand, I respect. And fury can accomplish a lot of things. But this is just rage.
No, and I've definitely seen, some of that rhetoric about, Minneapolis, we had your back. We all agreed with you. This was not the right solution. To burn that precinct down was just horrible. It's just we already were on the path to doing something, and this just like you said, it takes the legitimacy out of everything that they're standing up for now,
and squanders it.
Yeah.
mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but the $10 million it's going to take to rebuild that police station, I can tell you what that's going to do to budgets. It's certainly not going to be going toward community development as they have to rebuild the police station. It's slitting your own throat to prove that slitting throats is wrong. I find that pretty shocking.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw Killer Mike's speech, but that was that I actually enjoyed. We probably don't see eye to eye, but I enjoyed what he had to say, in that this is not going to fix it.
And he delivered it with a passion and a verve that was pretty impressive.
Oh yeah, no, he did not want to be there, and stated so. It was it's very good. If you have not seen it and are listening to this, that I would encourage you to go look at it. It definitely gives you a little bit of insight to the other side if you aren't aware. But yeah, very good. Well, I think we've batted this around enough. We could go at it for quite a while and never get to the bottom of it. So I think we're going to bring it back around to something maybe a little more inane and a little more fun.
Sure.
So even though we all want to stay safe and we want to be prepared and all of this, you, I think, like us, are somewhat of a gun guy, correct?
The funny thing is, I may be less of a gun guy than just about any sort of trainer you might know of. I'm not even sure I own 10 guns.
Yeah, well, we're disappointed. That's fine. It's okay.
I have a tendency to be a little bit of a pack rat. And so I've intervened on myself in order that I don't have a bunch of guns that I don't use or don't carry. So I tend to get one gun per niche and then just stop. I'm always trying to perfect, of course. And if I can get something better to replace what I have, like let's say the niche is a full-sized carry pistol, right? Like say I use a M&P 2.0 5-inch. Well, if I can get a better full-size carry pistol, I'll swap it out. But I won't add another one since the niche is already full. That's just my way of making sure that I don't wind up with 50 million guns. I have a friend who I was over at his house one day, and we discovered that he had a gun safe that he didn't even remember owning. When you don't remember how many safes you have, you own too many guns.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm certainly against people owning all the guns they want. I just, for my own self, I have to push back against the urge to hoard a little bit.
No, I hear you. So, well, there's one you've revealed, the M&P 5-inch, which is actually a very nice gun. And
yeah, I like it quite a bit. Once you get all the apex parts in it, I don't know that a polymer trigger gets much better than that.
No, the geometry and the mechanism in that are do lend themselves to more tuning than some of the other, we'll just say it, Tupperware guns. Mm-hmm. But it definitely does also shoot very well, and the 5-inch adds just enough weight and forward weight that it's got a much softer recoil as well.
And the rigid frame really helps too. The newly rigidized frame.
Yes.
I'm a real Rogers shooting school devotee, and the Rogers guns tend to be set up very much the same, which is the best trigger you can get, some good sights, and then stop monkeying with it. And that's just how I roll. It's basically stock. It's the first stock pistol I've ever owned that I didn't have to do anything to the grip to. I love the rougher the grip, the better. And the M&P 2.0 is the first polymer frame pistol that I never had to do anything to the grip to. So I've got some nice sights and an excellent trigger, and that's how I roll.
It's funny that's the one point I was going to make about that 2.0 is rarely can you get a plastic pistol out of the box and not have to do anything to the grip. I mean, I've melted my Glocks, each of them, at least 2 or 3 times. So, because they wear out and you think, oh, this needs to be rougher. But yeah, the M&P right out of the box is a great pistol.
Yeah. Well, I own a Glock 19 that I bought in 1988. It's actually a Gen 1, I guess, or I'm not even sure what you'd call it. But Glocks never did and never do fit my hand particularly well. I mean, now they've got the interchangeable back straps, but I have little bitty Fisher-Price hands, and the pure squareness of the Glock grip has never really suited me particularly well. And the M&P's got just a little bit of a contour that feels quite a bit better to me.
Well, and if you're looking to upgrade, the step from that to an STI DVC is a big jump. So you'd have to really think about it.
Oh, I was the first pistol I ever fired was in 1911, and I was a 1911 guy, hardcore, single stack. Then STIs. I had a STI tactical 5-inch that
Nice.
Oh, I shot that thing till the tires fell off. But when I had about a long 10-year run of running that pistol really hard, really heavy training cycles and all that. And eventually I got up to a point about 125,000 rounds through it. And it just started to get out of spec, I guess, just battered and all that. And when I said about getting another one, it just dawned on me that there were so many variations in the 2011 system that I just didn't feel like investing that many, whose grip, whose sights, whose extractor, whose barrel, who's this, who's magwell. It's like, you know what? I want something that runs out of the box.
Yeah.
And that started me on a little bit of a journey away from the 2011. Not that I don't love them. I mean, 2011 is set up right, is cheating.
We know
it
that.
It truly is.
It is. And I know that. Yeah.
The old joke is it's a life support system for the trigger, right?
Yeah.
And there's no getting around it. I mean, that's the best trigger in the world. And you can certainly make a case for the many values of an external safety. There's no doubt about that. So if you told me I had to carry a 2011, I'd thank you very much.
Right.
But just the way I'm in now, like even on my 2.0, I carry one with a safety because I carry appendix and I don't want to shoot myself in the junk. So I put the safety on when I holster. So I treat it a little bit like a 2011 anyway, just as a safety measure. And so I'm not opposed to it. And I'd certainly go back in a heartbeat if I felt like it would give me an advantage.
Yeah. Do you compete at all right now?
No, I have a couple of times, but I'm just sort of in a desert. There isn't really any option to compete anywhere near where I live in New Orleans. And I got to be honest, I'm not the kind of person that's going to hop in a car and drive 3 hours on a Saturday to do that sort of thing.
Sure.
I do a lot of dry fire, try to. I do a fair amount of live fire, but to me, the most important thing is the daily, or at least near daily contact, the recency effect. The 10 dry trigger presses you did last night are going to pay off a lot more than the 1,000 rounds I fired 6 months ago.
For sure.
Oh, yeah, we definitely advocate. We've got an accountability section at the end of our show, and there's always talk of dry fire, and my pistol coach, Mike Brown, and others believe that you should be dry firing about 10-1 live fire. So lots of dry fire. I'm actually looking at my 1/3 size IDPA target on my wall right here.
Mm-hmm. I think a rule that I have is I like there never to be more than 48 hours between trigger presses of some kind.
Good.
Whether it's dry or live, but you've got to be that familiar. Well, isn't that a little excessive? Well, I don't know. The ability to do a very important thing very, very well, I'm not sure you can ever really over focus on that.
Well, and the funny thing is, I admitted on a recent show that I never really did full drills in my dry fire. Once I discovered that going through Carl Wren's book, and we were doing his main, I think it's 3 seconds or less drill, I started doing the entire drill dry fire, and I was like, I just discovered a whole new universe.
That's interesting.
Yeah, if you're ever bored, just queue up the last 3 minutes of one of our shows, and you'll get a drill. You can shoot it dry fire. There's no reason you can't. You obviously aren't seeing your hits, but you can do that same motion and same everything.
I do like the a lot of the reactive target systems. You can use the little laser modules. I particularly like the chamber-sized laser modules, like from Laser Light. And I think Bill Rogers has a good point in that sometimes using the targets that will store up the laser hits, so you can actually see your hits. He said it encourages, Bill's point is that he thinks it encourages people to look over the sights, look for the holes. And I think he's right. But I also think it makes dry fire more enjoyable. And if you enjoy it more, you'll do it more. I mean, if it's important and it's work, we should do it because it's important. But if it's important and it's fun, that's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I use a cert gun with some receivers, and the receiver does not show the hit when you hit it, but I can look on the app on the phone and it will show me where it hit on the target. So I'm not chasing my hits.
Oh no, that's very interesting. Very cool. I find that very interesting. It so when you look at the target, it doesn't show hits, but then you can bring up an image that shows them.
Yep. So it'll give you an audible response, so you know you hit it. It'll give you a clang, just like a steel clang.
Exactly. And I, another Rogers principle, and I hate to keep harping on Rogers, but I really think it's an important frame of reference, is what Bill calls positive instant recognition. Mm-hmm. Like when you shoot a clay pigeon, you know you hit it.
Yep.
And that immediate feedback is so important because it lets you concretize, or what we call chunk, the behaviors you did that produced that overwhelmingly positive experience. When you track a let's say a clay pigeon and miss it, then you're thinking, geez, what did I do wrong? But when you hit it, your body can store what you did right instantly if the recognition is within about 300 milliseconds. Well, I have some, I haven't actually used them yet. They're sitting in a box now waiting to set them up. They're targets that make the sound of a steel plate being hit. They're laser targets, but when you hit it, it goes ping like a steel plate. And so I'm going to set up a scaled plate rack so that I can shoot and get that auditory recognition, not the visual, but the auditory, because I think that's even sometimes different and more reinforcing than what you can see. So I'm looking forward to seeing if that has any effects.
No, and it definitely, like you say, it's all about doing that same motion, even though you're not getting the recoil, you're actually getting the trigger press, you're getting that feedback. And as we talked about, and we're going to hopefully here soon, we're going to be talking to the man that talks about this. Your brain does not know the difference between novel stress and real stress.
Oh, absolutely not. The funny thing is people talk about, well, that's a game. Your mind doesn't know the difference. Stress is stress. People forget. Stress means the body's response to demands placed on it. Well, any demand is a demand. And you even hear sources such as Pat Rogers, the famous trainer Pat Rogers, the late and much lamented Pat Rogers, once said that scoring at the Rogers Shooting School was more stressful than actual combat. Now that sounds bizarre because no one at Rogers Shooting School is trying to kill you.
Yeah.
And yet the publicness of the scores, the public nature of your failures if you shoot badly, that put pressure on him, he said, in a way that was more stressful than actual combat. So the notion that game stress, unquote, won't translate to real stress and won't give you the benefits of improving and functioning under stress and let you carry that effect forward is flat out mistaken. Exposing yourself to stress of any kind increases your ability to manage the next stressful event. You're increasing your ability to be resilient, to take the decline in function that comes with the onset of stress and then counterbalance it very quickly with an increase in concentration and performance so you can actually get better performance under stress. And that's what we want, is folks that are so attenuated to stress that when their performance actually goes up under stress. And you can get there.
Nice.
Well, real quick, William, and then I have another question regarding gear just for fun. But so did you say what laser pistol you use? Do you use a SIRT also?
No, I use I know people like them, but I find the SIRT trigger, to me, doesn't feel like a gun at all. I don't know. But so I use these, they're laser cartridges. You drop it in the chamber of the pistol and the striker firing it makes a laser burst come out. I think Laser Light makes them.
Oh, cool.
It's about the size of a live round, and it drops in the chamber. And then if you cycle it between rounds, the striker actuation actually causes a little burst of laser to come out. I like those quite a bit. They come in different calibers, 90 and 45 and 40. So, 9, 45 and 40. And so you can get whichever one suits your gun the best. And I've had one for years, and I wore out my first one, so I've got a second one. I keep buying them.
Well, I definitely need to get a SIRT or some other form so I can kind of get more of a response from my dry fire too. So I'm always interested in what options there are, and there's now, of course, for Glocks, I believe maybe there's other pistols, but they have magazines that you can use that allow your trigger to reset. Now, I don't think they're perfect, but that's also another option.
Right. Anything that can, make the dry fire event and make the dry fire more like live fire in that, to have to reset between every round. Of course, it's hard to, you don't want to train yourself to do one shot anything. And I know there are the CO2 systems that will allow the gun to cycle. And I think I've gotten to play with one of those, and I think they're pretty impressive because you're actually having to manage recoil to a certain extent. And that's about as good as it's going to get. You combine that with a laser, and frankly, I think you've got all the benefits of live fire at that point. So I think the technological advances in dry fire are really getting interesting and make it much more fun and effective.
Sure. Now, one more fun gun gear question. Now, are you, by chance, when it comes to long guns, are you a shotgun guy or a rifle guy?
Well, again, I kind of think of it in terms of niches. I know that's maybe a little bit odd, but to me, I have a couple of niches. The first is I'm in my bedroom and you're trying to come in. And that niche for me is a shotgun.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big semi-automatic shotgun fan. I have a Remington 1100 Competition Master, which is 9+1, 12 gauge, and unbelievably robust and reliable. And if you try and enter my bedroom, you're going to get shot to ribbons. Now, if I need to go out of my bedroom looking for trouble, something a little shorter, a little more maneuverable, I'm more in favor of an AR pattern, shorter carbine, because it's just a little more maneuverable in the house. A shouldered, shorter carbine is about the same length as a pistol held at full extension, but with a lot more rounds on board and a lot more power. And then the final niche is, hell has come to town, and that's a battle rifle. And I'm an FAL guy. If I'm up on my porch trying to repel boarders with a 308, I want a nice, robust battle rifle. So those are the three niches that I see as pretty important in the things I use to fill them.
The beauty of the FAL, right?
I love how softly you can get it to operate, but I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I always love playing this with guys that love their AK or whatever. The AK has oppressed more people than any weapon in history, and the FAL has freed more of them.
Exactly right. People every now and again you'll hear it called the right arm of freedom.
Yes.
But I like them because they're simple and robust, rugged. I'm by no means a long range marksman, but I can get done what I think I need to get done with an FAL. But again, that niche is a battle rifle. Hell has truly broken out, and I need real firepower, and I spell that 308. And so those are the niches that I think are important.
Nice. Well, I think we're gonna pretty much wrap this up. We have taken enough of your time, but I have enjoyed every minute of it. It's always good to talk with you. Remind us again where people can find you.
Well, I guess the best way to kind of put your toe in the water is if you go to Instagram. I have an Instagram account called Aprill Risk Consulting, and I try to put up daily posts that I think are relevant about mindset and psychology and crime. And frankly, I think they're pretty good. So Aprill Risk Consulting on Instagram, and then I post the same things on the Aprill Risk account on Facebook. So either one of those is a good way to get your feet in the water. And then the website, which will hopefully soon be relisting classes available to take, is aprillriskconsulting.com, APRILL riskconsulting.com. And you can always get me there.
Nice. Well, is there anything you'd like to leave our pandemic-stricken, riot-fearing audience with?
Yeah, be careful. Be careful the choices you make about how much of this you want to expose yourself to. And another thing is don't get lost in despair. It's easy to say that, we're going to hell in a handbasket, but we've survived worse than this, and we're going to survive this. Democracy's hard, and you got to want it bad. And so to get this republic working, we got to recognize that it's going to take a best effort from all of us. And I don't think it's wrong to insist that people who have real responsibility to make things better do that. And I think we all need to take this opportunity to call out people who are acting in bad faith, because this is a bad situation, and good faith is what we need more than anything else. But bad faith changes everything. People that are not acting in good faith and trying to make things better, I think we all have the right and the duty to say, listen, pal, you're not doing what I need you to do. It's part of being a good steward of this country that we were all gifted, and pointing it in the right direction.
Awesome.
Well said.
Awesome.
Well said.
Well, thank you, William. And again, appreciate you being on. You have a good evening.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. Well, hey, everybody. Just so glad to have had William Aprill on the show. Again, he's always amazing to listen to, and one of my favorite experts in this entire genre of just filtered, amazing instruction that's available these days. So, Eric, we're going to go ahead and jump into accountability, and I'm going to go ahead and get it started here. Okay, for my workouts, I went ahead and stayed with my daily squats and pull-ups. I'm continuing that. That's working really well for me. I'll stop in the middle of the day and take care of that. Now, I finally got to the gym with my wife. They're allowing businesses to open again here, and we got to go to the gym, and I got a really good cardio workout. I did a lot of stationary bike work. I've been wanting to do that to get off of my feet, and my back kind of hurts sometimes when I get on the treadmill for too long, so that was really nice. And then I did quite a bit of rowing on a row machine. That was really good. So again, really glad to get a cardio workout, and I'm going to do that at least once a week, go to the gym, and then do my other cardio here at home.
Hey, Aaron, do you mind if I ask a question about your workout?
Yeah.
Have you used the rowers that much in the past?
Oh, not a lot, no.
I was just curious because I know that you don't have one at home necessarily, and I just wondered if you had before, man. I tell you, man, you can wreck yourself on those if you really want to. I can send you some of the interval stuff that I do on them if you're interested.
Oh, man, completely. That's awesome, man. Well, so now on to my dry fire. I found a really cool third scale IDPA target, and I've been using that quite a bit to practice on the IDPA classifier section, the last section, which is the 4 to the body, 1 to the head, which seems to be almost everybody's nemesis on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been practicing that at 10 feet so I can get that feel for that 10 yards, which that headshot at 10 yards when you're trying to go fast is not easy. So, and that can cost you 5 seconds real easy. So I'm glad to have that. Now, jiu-jitsu. Last night, I got to go to my first full class. So
Awesome, man.
Oh, yeah, it was great. I started using some muscles that I forgot I had. I was forgetting techniques and stuff. I actually was a little bit stressed out when I was there, but that's all right. I was so glad to get back on the mats. And just a shout out to my buddy John, who was my partner last night. He's a great friend and a great partner. So, hey, buddy, thanks for being a good partner with me last night. Now, I did refine my IDPA master affirmation statement. Eric, we're, of course, talking about the concepts of that Lenny Basham teaches. So I had a really good lesson with Mike Brown, like I said, on the last episode. And from what I learned from that, I went ahead and refined my affirmation statement, tightened it up, and made a few more sections of it more concise so it's quicker to go through. Now, for my range session, that classifier 5x5, 4 shots to the body, 1 to the head, I went ahead and worked that some more live fire. Got quite a few of those in there, and I'll make this clear too. I forgot about this. I'm keeping my range sessions to 100 rounds these days. I usually like to shoot more, but boy, I got to be stingy with that ammo just in case, since it's so expensive these days and harder to find. Now I went ahead and, of course, did the drill of the week. Now I used my Del Frick competition holster that's just a nice straight drop out of the waistband holster. That's kind of nice to use from time to time. So my first iteration, I made an 86. I had now of course let's remind everybody, this is the test, the 10 yards, 10 seconds, and from the holster. The first one, like I said, I made an 86 on it. I had one flyer for some reason, so I didn't count that at all. So that was just 9 shots to get 86. Now my second time, made a 93, and then third time, 94. Nice little progression there. I'd like to tighten that up a little bit, but I'm proud of those scores. That's pretty good.
Awesome job, man. I mean, that's what we're aiming for, is above 90, and you met that, brother. Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Well, man, that's all I've got for this week. How about you?
Well, Aaron, so I'm just going to go ahead and start off with my reading this week. I'm back to A Land of Hope. That's a Hillsdale College course, and the textbook. That's an amazing way to learn. If you guys out there want to just add to your education, go to hillsdale.edu, I believe is the URL, and just sign up for some free classes. Like I've stated on here before, you can get a superior, let's just put it, a footnotes education on that website. It's amazing. I mean, just a solid conservative liberal arts degree, for free. Now, granted, you don't have actual credit, but boy, you get the knowledge for sure. So check that out. Also, as far as our novels, Aaron, have you ever heard of Jack Carr?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, and I heard about him a while back, but for some reason I really hadn't been paying attention to it, and I rediscovered Jack Carr, and I'm currently reading The Terminal List. Yeah, if any of you guys out there like kind of the CIA thriller type novels, this is a fun one. So check that out. Plus, the guy's a former Navy SEAL, so there's a lot of realism in the book. So he kind of beats up on guys like me that was a support, but that's okay.
Bro,
so
you,
go ahead.
You kick indoors, but you just help people out after you get in there.
Exactly. So dry fire wise, Aaron, I was telling you about this pre-show that I really like the FBI 2019 call for just a good down and dirty dry fire drill. Like you were talking about using the scaled down IDPA target. I have a scaled down FBI qual target. I should have the number on here. I'll put it in the show notes.
You need to shoot that to me so I can use that too.
Yeah, no problem, man. And using the scaled targets, the FBI qual just has that you shoot the actual bottle of the target. But I think it's, for us that are striving for higher, there's no reason why you can't meet the standards or the par time and still hit that center box. I think that's the aim that we should have. And especially when you're dry firing, you can call your shots. That's what dry fire is about. I know when I would have missed, any of my shots when I was working that last night. And frankly, that's what we want to aim for. So check that out for a dry fire drill. As far as my workouts this week, I was traveling. Unfortunately, I only got 2 workouts. And I forgot to mention, I digress. I only got 2 dry fire sessions in as well. So, but my workouts were pretty intense. A lot of more conditioning right now. I've kind of got some additional goals in my conditioning for jiu-jitsu when I get the opportunity to train on the mats again. So less strength work, more conditioning, a lot of kettlebells, jump rope, and there's a rower at the the new prison gym I'm at right now. So that's been my focus is conditioning. So that was a lot of fun. And I just want to kind of mention, for a while we have not been talking much about gear. So I just want to put out there, I know we like gear. I know our audience members like gear, but we're going to start doing a little bit more gear discussion on here. So, but when we talk about gear, we're going to be talking about stuff that's not our favorite gear necessarily, but what we believe works and what can kind of streamline for you guys. So I just wanted to kind of hit that up as a teaser. I think that moves us to the drill of the week. Again, we're kind of hitting a theme here of repeating past drills. So we're going to go back to the FAST drill. That's the Todd Green FAST Drill. Let's go ahead and do a test retest. And that is at 7 yards. Let's just make it simple. On an IDPA target with a 3x5 card on the head. You're going to start with 2 rounds in the gun. So it's going to go empty after the 2 rounds. From concealment, on the buzzer, you're going to draw and fire 2 shots to the head box, which is a 3x5. And then you're going to reload. You got to have at least 4 rounds in the gun. And then fire 4 rounds into the center 8-inch circle. Again, I think the last time we did this drill, I think all of us were pretty impressed with what you get out of it. You get a draw. Your first target is a small target, so you have to really slow down and see what you need to see to get those 2 headshots. And you have an emergency reload, which we know doesn't happen much on the street for the civilians, but it's still a very important skill. If you need it, you really need it. And then you get to burn down, I'll just use that term, 4 rounds to that center circle. So let's see what we're looking like out there. Let's see if we've improved. I believe that if you guys have been following with us on all these drills and our dry fire, my guess is that you reduce the drill time by a half a second or a second or even way more if you were, let's say you were somewhere around the 12 to 10 second range. I bet you're a lot faster, like an exponential increase. So let us know how you guys do out there, and we'll let you know how we do. What do you think, Aaron?
Sounds good, buddy. I'm glad we're doing that drill again, and I, of course, keep all these scores in my training journal. So looking forward to seeing if I can increase on that. I'm planning on it. So yeah, that's fun to revisit another drill, one of our drills.
Well, Aaron, I'm glad you mentioned that training journal. That's, again, something else we like to remind folks of, that you got to keep track of what your progress is, because you don't know if you're improving if you're not measuring yourself. So, again, that's why we give these drills, and that's why we also, in many of them, provide a yardstick, to what you're kind of going for. And those journals, I think I've said this before, my training journals and my journal of just my notes and my thoughts and, all of the good things that happen in my life or ideas. I mean, EvoSec was partially birthed in one of my journals. So,
Cool.
If you got, and I'll have to find that page in my journal and see where that actually took place. I think that'd be interesting. Maybe I'll post that. But yeah, journals are deeply important. So make sure you guys are doing that. It'll help you. Well, Aaron, with that said, I think we'll go ahead and close it out, man. I'm really glad we got to do this.